And now it's time for our audio post-processing section. Here's where things get a little more fun.
The first important point we have here is that you need to back up your audio, and there's a few different ways that you can do that. The first way here is just to keep separate folders for the original audio file.
Yeah, what you want to do is make sure that you have backups. Think of this as your way to back things up, because when you get audio from a voice talent, they usually save the files. But if they don't, and you've messed them up on your machines, guess what? You're hosed. You're in trouble. You're going to either have to get a new recording, which you'll probably have to pay for, or you'll need to scramble. You don't want to do that. When you have those file folders, if we go back to the folders screen, we usually keep things, for example, in a raw folder. Anything that we've recorded natively or that someone has sent us as a recording, we keep separate. Those are our raw files, things that have not yet been touched and will never be touched. Then when we edit our audio, we put it into a processed file. So now we have a copy in our raw, which is the original, and then we have a copy again in the processed folder that has been processed. It's the volume's been adjusted, we've cleaned up audio issues, we've added compression, we've done all the things, we've cut things up, we've done all the things that we need to do in order to get final audio. So make sure you keep things separate. The reason being, if you lose anything along the way, it's easier to recoup or restore. If you don't have that, you will be in trouble. And raw, again, keep that in mind. It's very important to keep things separate. Also, make sure they're not on your machine alone. Unless you're a one-person show and you have everything on one machine, try to have an external drive if you're in that situation. If not, if you're in an office environment or a studio environment, put all of your audio on a server once you're done with the editing. That will protect you from anything that could happen to a PC or a Microsoft update or a Mac update. It's amazing what they break sometimes, both of them. So make sure that you keep your audio away from where you're developing, because you may need that later on. It also protects it. Make sure if you're on a Mac, you've got Time Machine set up to back up your audio directories, because again, you don't want to lose that. People get in the habit of being quick and sloppy. That gets you in trouble. Take your time, have backups, even though they take up more disk space. It's okay. That will protect you later on in the future.
Now that we've covered that, we're going to ask, what is post-production? And post-production is the art and science of processing audio after it's been recorded. These are some of the things it includes. We've got dynamics. We've got equalizing sound, all the other effects, and then output.
Yeah, and dynamics are things that change volume, that could change the way a sound sounds, the way your audio sounds. These are areas that we do all the time. Compressors, limiters, gates, all of those are part of the dynamics processing. When you start looking at equalization, now we're changing the highs, the lows, the mids, and we're changing those frequencies to either pop out a sound or to diminish a sound, to make it quieter. And all of that goes to making great sound.
And so here's what dynamics look like when you're opening up the dynamics interface in, say, Adobe Audition or something.
And they're pretty similar in all of the audio files.
And compression is going to be a common type of change in dynamics that you'll perform. Here's an example of what a compressed wave on the top there looks like, as opposed to a uncompressed wave.
Yeah, you'll notice the compressed wave is a little thicker, if you will, a little richer, a little fuller. That's because you're improving the quality and value of the sound. The compression takes out any external noise you might have and then cleans it up. And you can also add or remove volume from the compressed file if you want to make it louder, the same, or a little quieter.
And next, we have a demo of some of the different post-processing things that you might do in your audio editing suite. Here we're demonstrating Adobe Audition. Once you've recorded your audio, You may need to add effects to make the audio sound better. So let's go over to our effects rack panel here. We're going to create a chain of effects. So the first thing we're going to cover, and note that effects will be applied in the order that they show up here. We're going to add an FFT filter. A good preset for the FFT filter is mastering, gentle, and narrow. As you can see, this is affecting different frequencies and reducing them or boosting them, as you see on the points here. Gentle and narrow just kind of smooths out some of the harsher bits of voiceover recordings. The next effect that we're going to add here is going to be something called compander. It's under amplitude and compression, and then you go to dynamics processing. It's a preset for dynamics processing, and it is right here. What this tends to do is take out a lot of the noise from your recording. Depending on where your noise floor is, that is the level of your background noise, you'll want to move this point here. This is where it totally cuts off audio. So audio that's below this volume will be cut off. Let's play back our audio and see where our noise floor is. I'm going to turn this off first so that we can see where our noise floor is without the effect.
1PO1.
As you can see down here, we're at about -54. So I'm going to move this point towards that area. And let's turn it on and play it back again.
LO1PO1. Congratulations, you've taken a step to make your life and health better.
As you can see, the voiceover itself sounds pretty much the same, which is as it should be. However, it's taken out noise that we would otherwise have heard. Another effect that you may need to add is amplification. This just brings up the volume of your voice clip. Always try to increase your sound levels by whole numbers, as opposed to, say, 3.27 like I have here. Small changes should be made in increments of 1 decibel or more, because a small fraction of a decibel won't be discernible by the human ear. Our particular clip that we have here, we don't need amplification, so I'm just going to close this out. The optimal level of your audio will have the peaks at around -3 and the majority of the voice around -6. Oftentimes when you receive audio from voice talent and voiceover artists, you'll find the peaks are more around -9 or -12. This is so that you can bring it up to where you need to later on. The next effect I'm going to show you is a 10-band equalizer. This gives you a little more control on tweaking different frequencies. You can also add a 20 or a 30 band, which just gives even more control on those different frequency bands and allows you to reduce or add gain to the volume of these different bands of frequencies. I'm not going to do that here. I will, however, show you another effect. There's a lot of effects that you can add in Audition. As you can see, you have all of these lists, and you can also get other effects as paid plugins and that sort of thing. I'm just going to add a little bit of reverb here. We're just going to go into these presets here, and we'll click on Bigger Room Ambience, and let's just see how that sounds.
Congratulations, you've taken a step to make your life and health better.
Of course, this isn't going to be very appropriate for the voiceover that we're doing, so we're just going to turn that off, or we can even just delete it. If you have a really noisy recording, then instead of dynamics processing, here you might use something called denoise. Denoise is an AI-based noise reduction tool that dynamically tries to figure out what sounds are background noise and takes them out. I find that the default value they give you of 40% tends to be really quite high and can sometimes cause distortion in the voice, so I usually dial that back to around 15%. Just play with it until you take out the noise that you want to, but have a voice clip that still sounds good. As I said earlier, there are a lot of different effects in Adobe Audition. Just look around in these menus and you'll probably find something that suits your needs for whatever you need to do to make your audio sound as good as you need it to be. Important fact that I omitted in that demo was that once you have the effects that you need for your sound, then when you're working with a single track like we were there, you'll need to push apply on the bottom of your effects rack there, and it'll actually apply it so that when you export it and that sort of thing, then it will have the effects on there. And our next demo is on a very important and sort of basic audio editing skill, but also one that tends to be easy to get wrong, amplification. And I'm just going to show how to use amplification in Adobe Audition. Here's how to use Amplify in Adobe Audition to bring your voice recording up to the level you need. So we're going to start by creating an audio recording that has the levels a little too low. Adobe Audition is a popular sound editing tool used for voiceover. Let's listen back to that. Adobe Audition is a popular sound editing tool used for voiceover. And now let's play it again and take a look at the levels meter on the bottom there. We want to see where most of the audio is hanging out. Adobe Audition is a popular sound editing tool used for voiceover. Much of it is around -13. So we want to get it to -6. Let's add Amplify. Go to Effects, Amplitude and Compression, Amplify. And the difference between -6 and -13, we want to add 7 decibels to this. Adobe Audition is a popular sound editing tool used for voiceover. And depending on your recording, sometimes the peaks will get pretty high here. Some of your peaks might even get slightly clipped. If it gets a little bit clipped, that's not too bad. But if you're getting a lot of clipping, then you might want to just add less amplification, or you might have to do some other steps first, like adding a compander or some other sort of compression first. In our case here, I think it worked out pretty well, so we're just going to add the compander afterwards. Let's go to Amplitude and Compression, Dynamics Processing, and the preset is called Compander. And now let's listen to that again. Adobe Audition is a popular sound editing tool used for voiceover. And that's it for the audition demos this section. Our next point is on equalization. We talked about equalization a little bit before, but this is what the parametric equalizer looks like in Audition, and it just shows kind of these different frequency points that you can raise and lower.
And again, what you're doing with this kind of processing is you're changing the way highs, mids, and lows sound. You're adding maybe more highs to something. More often than not, we're probably enhancing the lows a little bit, evening out the mids, and lowering the highs. But it all depends on your voice and what you're trying to achieve. They're easy to work with. Play with them. Don't apply until you're ready. And keep in mind, you can always do a Control-Z or a Command-Z on a Mac to undo.
And a common audio editing technique that we didn't really cover in our demo because we don't use it so much ourselves is normalize.
Normalizing. Normalizing's a little tricky, and it also misleads people into thinking it works well. It can work well, but it won't give you the results you want always. In fact, almost no time. For example, with normalization, it's used to make all files, all levels, all peaks about the same. So it raises the sound. Let's say it tries to get the most sound of your WAV file out of your WAV file. The problem being that if you're trying to get the voice to minus 6 decibels, that means you've got to raise something up to minus 6, but it may look like it's going up to minus 1, minus 3, and when you play it back, you're at minus 8, minus 9, maybe minus 3. You're not where you need to be, which is minus 6 dB. So it's safer not to do it this way, but rather to do a little bit of math. Let's say a voice talent gives you something that's at minus 13. So at minus 13 dB, that's very low. You need to get up to minus 6, so you need to add about 7 dB or of gain. Actually, 13.7.
Yeah, 7.
So it's 7 dB of gain. And that will give you a fuller sound at where you want it, because otherwise you may go too high or too low, and if you keep doing it, it's going to get confused. It won't work as well as you might think. So stick to amplitude and amplify to make it a little louder when you need to be louder. The good thing about audio processing in today's day and age, taking away or adding sound doesn't change the sound. It just makes it higher or lower in gain. So you can do that 100 times. You won't cause any issue while you're editing because it's only changing one property, which doesn't cause a loss in the file. It just changes the volume of that file.
And as you can see in the picture of the two different waveforms here, essentially what normalize does is it just stretches the amplitude of the wave to fit whatever limit you set it to, and it's totally dependent on the loudest peaks. So if you're pretty quiet throughout the whole clip, but then say in the middle of your voice clip you clap and that makes a loud peak, then it's going to only be based on that loudest peak. And that's part of why you can run into problems with it. Our next topic is on outputting audio, and these are sort of the three main formats that you'll probably be putting your audio out to: WAV, MP3, and AAC.
Now, WAV files are your standard type of audio file that you find on a PC. You can also find them on Macs. You can export to WAV in both, and they're the ones probably most easily supported anywhere. Sometimes it's called PCM/WAV or PCM WAV files. Then you've got MP3s, which are compressed files. Those are supported by a lot of things, but they sometimes have some quality issues depending on how high or how well they've been processed. Finally, you've got AIF files, which are pretty much Mac only, and they're similar to WAV files, but again, they're not used everywhere. And even though Mac people think Macs are the only computers, by the way, I have two of them. We have several more in the office, but we're not Mac fanatics. We're Mac users, and we're also Windows and PC users. We use both. The Macs at AIF files aren't going to sound as good if you're on a PC. They just won't. They'll be okay, but you're better off with WAV files almost everywhere. And you'll get good results with WAV files as your main files. Don't export and import into other tools with MP3s, because again, you're dealing with a lossy format, meaning lossy means it loses some of its quality, versus lossless, which keeps the value. With WAV files, you're not going to lose the quality depending on what you do. With MP3s, you might, and you probably will after many iterations of changes. So just keep that in mind. WAV files are probably the best way to go, in other words, to be as most compatible with everything.
And this leads into our next point on that you should always insert the best quality sound that you can into your authoring tool. Because, as Rick said, every time you edit an MP3, every time it has to code from MP3 to MP3 or from WAV to MP3, it's technically going to lose some quality, whether you can hear it or not. And the more you have to edit, in time it will just sound terrible.
And we did some experiments with MP3s, and in particular with Articulate the storyline. And the more we modified something or changed something, even just going in and getting out, publishing it again, after about 20 iterations, that's a lot of iterations. Normally you'll only be doing 1 or 2, maybe 3 max. You may get a little bit of loss, but not that much. But after 20 iterations, you lost 5 dB of gain. That's quite a bit of gain. So it went from a normal -6 to about a -10 or 11. that's quite a bit of loss and gain. Also, it adds time. When you encode to an MP3, you're adding a little bit of time at the beginning of each one automatically with the encoder that Articulate uses. So that makes it, I think it was what, how many seconds?
It went from 2 seconds to 4 seconds. It adds a little to both the beginning and the end.
Yeah.
And really, every MP3 encoder will add some time. This is based on the fact that they do that because it takes some time for the decoder to start playing it. So they add it so it doesn't get cut off. But that means every time you edit an MP3, it gets longer.
Yeah, and just to reiterate a point we made in an earlier session, always have about a half second of time in front of audio files or after an audio file. That gives the encoders, when they're playing, time to play it. Not because otherwise you may get cut audio, and that happens all the time. You may get the beginning cut or maybe the ending a little bit cut if you're too tight. People, when they're first learning how to do audio editing, like to cut it really close. Can't waste any seconds or any time, no space. And then the audio gets cut all the time. And they go, what happened? I did everything right. No, I actually did one thing wrong. You took too much time out from the beginning of that WAV file. And as a result, it has no time to load empty space. And so you hear a cut as it comes in too late.
You will see some of these examples and learn about some of the caveats of audio and authoring in our next section, which is on audio and authoring.
We'll see you there.